This is the MFG Monkey Podcast. We sit down with leaders and innovators in the industry to talk about manufacturing, business, and the stories behind their successes. I'm your host, Dustin McMillan, owner and founder of McMillan Co. On today's episode, we have Drew Paroz. Drew is a leader who thrives at the intersection of people, tech, and strategy. Drew's journey in manufacturing began at the young age of 15, where he has since progressed through diverse experiences and roles in manufacturing, purchasing, supply chain, data, and technology. Drew is currently transformation leader for a value chain program at Honda. His focus, both professionally and in life, is developing comprehensive systems that not only drive value, but also empower individuals to unlock their full potential. Drew also hosts a podcast called Wonder Tour, where he connects leadership lessons to your favorite movie. Welcome, Drew. What's up, Drew? How are you?
I'm great today, Dustin. I'm great. It's always good to be recording a podcast. It's good to talk about manufacturing, business, transformation.
Yeah, well, that was way cheesier than what I intended my hello, Drew to be, but we'll roll with it, right? So I guess to jump into it, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell our audience about yourself.
Yeah, my name's Drew Paroz. I've been working in manufacturing really since I was a kid. My dad and my grandpa started and owned a manufacturing company, so doing batch manufacturing, high precision machining, all sorts of stuff. So got a little bit of experience all over the place as a part of working there since I was a kid. And then I ended up figuring out that what I'm really all about is systems, and really not systems for the sake of software or anything like that, or, oh, we got to optimize, even though that was what my undergrad was in, but more so, how do we create systems that empower people? How do we create systems that not only achieve our business objectives and create value for our customers, our shareholders, the world at large, and obviously ourselves as well, but how do we empower people to, while doing this, really accomplish their dreams and achieve their potential? And so that kind of has taken me where I'm at now, where I work on a program where we are working on value chain transformation at Honda, where I am the transformation leader.
Right. Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Systems empower people, and without a system, you're just floundering. I don't care what you're doing. You could be fishing or running a multi-million-dollar production line. If you don't have a good system in place, you don't know where you're at and you don't know where you're going. So I think what you're doing over at Honda is pretty damn impressive. And you've been there for how long? I mean, we chatted over a beer, and I can't remember everything that we talked about, but you've been there for quite a while.
Yeah, going on 9 years now. It goes by quick.
Yeah, that's really cool. So one of the things that impressed me about your tenure there was that you don't stay in the same position very long, which for a guy like you, just, my immediate, knowing you the little bit that I do, your mind is going so quickly that you have to change it up often.
Oh, you picked up on that, definitely, then, just in one meeting.
Right.
Yeah, I jump around, and I have to know about all sorts of different things, right? So I've jumped around between data, software, technology, business operations, new model development, all these different areas, because I really want to understand the whole breadth of it, because that's how you optimize systems. You have to understand more than just a silo.
Sure. Well, and there's so many companies that do operate in silos, and I've worked at those companies, and this division doesn't even know what this other division does. And if they did and they worked together, or people could be cross-trained, it would be so much more effective and efficient. And I would have to think that the culture would be way better as well. Last week I spoke to David Altamir, and he, we kind of touch on the culture when they do implement a new ERP for a company. You kind of see the culture of the company come up a little bit, because everyone knows what everyone is doing or should be doing. That system allows employees to hit rates, or team members to hit rate, and there's just a lot of cool things around that. You and I started to talk about dimming, but neither one of us could remember what his name was, and that guy is a systems freak, right? I mean, you guys have to implement a lot of dimming practices at Honda.
Yeah, Deming has influenced, I mean, everything that anybody has done for the last 30, 40 years, right? Sure. In manufacturing and in processes. So even if you don't know that you're talking about Deming, and trust me, I'm terrible at remembering names. I'm sure I'll drop a few quotes or anecdotes and be like, I'm sorry, I just can't remember who said it. My brain does not record names well.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I remember faces pretty well. Names not so much. So I guess jump into, some of the goals that, and I know that you can't get into a lot of what you do at Honda, but if you could kind of touch on, give us the 30,000 foot view that won't get you fired.
Yeah, exactly. This is probably a good time to say, nothing that I say here represents the views of my employer.
Right.
And truly,
truly
it does it, right?
Sensitive things at Honda. So, I want to be sensitive of that and not pry into that a whole lot, because what you're doing now there is pretty cool.
Well, I want to talk about something I think that's really interesting here, and it actually relates to Toyota. So, and this is something that not everybody recognizes. If you're in manufacturing, perhaps the most obvious thing about Toyota is the Toyota production system. Not that Toyota was the only inventor of lean or purveyor of lean, but Toyota has executed on lean and developed the systems to support lean and all of the surrounding mindsets and principles better than anybody else has.
Okay.
Really, at least to me. And so one thing that I think about here, and this is what I try to apply, not just to what I do at work, but what I do everywhere, Toyota kind of thinks about things differently than most of us. Many people, when you say system, they will assume you're talking about a software platform, something like that. When Toyota talks about a system, they mean the whole thing. They mean people, process, data, technology. That is a system. Nothing less than that can be a system.
Right.
So if you're thinking, and at your company, wherever you work, you're thinking in terms of applications are systems or processes are systems or whatever, I have been challenged over the last couple of years to figure out what it means to take a step back from that and think, okay, no, the whole thing is a system, how everyone works together with the processes, with the tech to be able to accomplish the goal. We can never separate the technology from the people, from the process.
Right, because everyone's working together. All the different pieces of the system have to all run. So just like an engine, if there's a missing valve or whatever, it's just not going to run properly.
No. And I think that the challenging part with that is we had systems that were developed over so long, right? There were systems developed over decades and decades to be able to do things efficiently, to be able to utilize our manpower and human resources efficiently, to be able to leverage our servers and everything efficiently. And then it feels like over the past couple decades, but really even over the past maybe 1 to 2, the rate of change has become so much faster than it used to be, where it's like every day you're waking up and it's like, have you seen this new generative AI pin that you're going to put on you and it's going to project a hologram? And you're like, well, how is this going to impact me personally? How is this going to impact my business? And what we find is that the systems that were built over the last handful of decades and even centuries in some, like for some systems, aren't able to adapt fast enough anymore.
So how are you guys fixing that problem?
Well, I think at first I just want to talk about what the problem is and what it feels like, and then we can kind of work our way narratively towards how can you fix that problem? Mm-hmm. Because everybody in the world is dealing with it, no matter what industry you're in. It's not just manufacturing.
Sure. Yeah. And we talked before, it's restaurants, it's everything. And as we talked before, restaurants is probably one of the, they're the furthest behind everything because it's, still, pretty archaic. You're burning meat to serve to people. And it's like, how does that really change? And it has been disruptive or just disrupted by COVID and people were getting deliveries more and the way we shop is different. And, that goes into why are we shopping for the car the exact same way? why do we feel that we have to show up to the dealer and drive it around and, do those things? And we just bought a car for Brandy's daughter a couple days ago. And while I like to do everything online, we still went and we drove to Indianapolis. We drove the car, and it was in horrible condition. You couldn't tell that from the pictures. So we ended up not buying the car, and we drove all the way back. So it does make me skeptical of like Carvana, where this car just shows up in your driveway and you're like, oh yeah, that's not pink, it's white. So it's everything is just changing faster than we can realize.
Yeah, and there's a great quote about that from John Cotter. He, I think like 15, 20 years ago, put out this book, Accelerate. But he said, the world is now changing at a rate at which the basic systems, structures, and cultures built over the past century cannot keep up with the demands being placed on them. And it just feels like that. It feels like oftentimes the rate of change is just outstripping the systems. And it's, to me, this is the best way I've been able to describe it. It's like my organization, me personally, even my family, whatever, like we are like the shores of a beach and we cannot control it. The waves just keep crashing down. And it's like, even if I'm on the ground, like gasping for air, the waves just keep coming. It's like, okay, here's the next thing that you're going to have to deal with.
Yeah. Well, and we were talking about this yesterday in our Visage meeting that, and I'm sure going to screw this quote up, but the ocean has more context than anything in the world, but it says nothing. And it was pretty cool. I'm a water guy. We're on the water as much as we possibly can, and it is. You go out and you sit in the water, and it's nothing stays stagnant. Everything is moving. The waves are crashing. It's eroding the shore, and much like our lives, it's changing constantly. Nothing is ever staying stagnant.
Yeah, and it's only going to get worse and worse because the rate of change is increasing at an increasing rate right now. So if we don't develop some sort of solution for this, it's not like things are just going to get better. It's going to become more anxiety inducing. It's going to put more and more businesses out of business who aren't able to keep up while other businesses are.
Right. Well, and I feel like we've seen that as we've come out of the pandemic. The folks that didn't change or refuse to do things differently, they're not with us anymore. And we were one of those companies. I mean, we had to change everything. In a matter of a year, the supply chain changed so much. The way that we, employment changed so much, employees, team leaders, all these things changed so much that, for us as a company, if we didn't change, McMillan Co. wouldn't be there. So to see these companies that are kind of hanging on and not making change, not implementing systems, or at some point, I feel like they're going to be left behind. And there are so many small mom and pop shops that still don't operate on an ERP system, or they don't even know what the hell an ERP system is. And, they're still quoting and pushing jobs out on the floor with a, spreadsheet and a paper traveler. And I kind of fear for those companies a little bit.
Yeah, the Dunder Mifflins of the world.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, it's so funny watching The Office now because you go back and you're like, wow, they were literally selling paper. Like, that was a terrible business to be in at that time. Yeah. And of course, they knew it. The creators knew that, and that was part of it. But it's even more obvious now where you're like, how often do I use paper?
Right. Oh,
and how would Michael Scott manage this? That's definitely not what we're going to do.
Yeah, we should do a whole episode on Michael Scott and things to do and not do, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I've done an episode or two on Michael Scott before in podcast history. That's not a lie.
That is an interesting point because your podcast, you guys talk about business and how it relates to different movies, right?
Yeah, so I do a podcast that's unrelated to Honda called Wonder Tour, and it's all about leadership and business application, personal application. But yeah, we just take movies, TV shows like The Office, Marvel, Star Wars, and we just try to pull out lessons that we can learn because I hate dry content. I don't want to just sit here and hear about the 7 best practices of how to run my manufacturing business or whatever. That's fine every once in a while, but I need something that's story-driven that actually sticks to my brain.
Right. No, and I'm the same way. And that's, when I created this podcast, there's plenty of stuffy manufacturing podcasts out there, and I wanted this one to be a little different, where it was a little more off the cuff and you're joking around a little bit. And if we were together, maybe, having a bourbon together, whatever. But there is a lot of dry content out there. I tried to listen to another one that was, it was doctor related. And I'm like, people listen to this for 2.5 hours? It's really good content here, but it's way too dry for me. So
yeah. I listened to some of those. I'm not going to lie. I listened to some very, very, I think I was mentioning that to you. Like, okay, yeah, most people aren't going to sit and listen to like a theological debate for 2.5 hours or whatever, a lecture, right. But sometimes I do listen to those as well. But again, we're trying to reach people here in a way that's meaningful, in a way that like you actually want to engage with us. You actually want to take what we're talking about and do something in your life with it. Because otherwise, what is it? It's just distracting you from the problems of today. There's a million things that can do that.
Sure. So let's jump into so you've had 8 or 9 different positions with Honda. What was by far your favorite?
Well, that might be a little bit too many. Not quite that many. I think one of the more interesting things was launching a data analytics team in an area that hadn't had data analytics before. Mm-hmm. So that just taught me a lot about how you are able to navigate the change in the world, because I felt like when I was launching a data analytics team, like it was this uphill battle. People believed in data analytics, but they didn't necessarily like know how to act on it and create value with it. Otherwise, obviously, we already would have done so. Mm-hmm. So to me, I learned so much in doing that. And of course, a lot of it was about data governance, data analytics, and all of that area. But more than that, I think what I learned was about organizational change management. Okay. And really, to me, that's like the key takeaway here. And that's almost the thread that pulls through. Because you said you had to go through a big change over COVID with Macmillan Co.
Right. Yep.
And how do you manage that? Because I remember being at a conference a handful of years ago, and there was a study from Gartner or whatever that was pulled up, and I'm going to butcher this, but it said over half of CEOs don't believe they can change the culture of their company. And that was astounding to me at that time. I was like, what do they think they can do? Because controlling the culture of your company is the sustainability of your company. Yeah. That is the primary driver of the sustainability of your company.
Yeah, and that's a sensitive subject for me, because I was brought to a company, and one of the things that the president wanted me to do was change the culture of the company. And I'm like, hell yeah, that sounds like a great challenge on top of, business development and things like that. But, it was an aging workforce. I think the average age at this company was over 55. Company was over 100 years old, owned by the same ownership for, a few decades. And the culture was horrible. I mean, it was, people wouldn't even show up to the Christmas party. Horrible. And if they did, they just bitched about everything once they were at the Christmas party. So it was a really interesting, thing that you bringing up about culture is, I think one of the CEO's main jobs is they create the culture, right? It starts with, with the CEO or with the president, and everyone, they adapt to the culture that the leader has. So for that statistic to be that high is overwhelmingly shocking to me.
Yeah, well, it also tells you what the competition is like. So in some ways, it's sad, but it's also encouraging. You're like, okay, well, if I believe that I can, and I have evidence that I can change the culture. And that was really one of the things that shook me, because I was like, well, I can change the culture, and I'm surely not the CEO.
Right.
So I can change the subcultures that I'm in, and slowly those subcultures pervade the larger culture and things change. And I don't do it by myself. I'm not trying to sit here and pat myself on the back and say, oh, I did all this stuff. Right. But my actions are meaningful. And if I take ownership of the change that we want to go through, you can get out of organizational inertia, or a point at where your organization becomes very inward facing, which I'm assuming is maybe where you were at a couple of years ago. Everything was focused on optimizing in the silo and just Kaizening everything to death, which Kaizen is a great thing. I love Kaizen.
Yep.
But if that's all you're about is just looking inward at yourself constantly and at yourself as a company constantly and saying, oh, we got to improve here, we got to improve there, but you're not understanding how you interact with the outside world around you and where the outside world is going, if you're not constantly keeping your finger to the pulse on your customer or your users, or both, ideally, of the products or services that you're creating, that's when you get stuck in organizational inertia mode. And I've seen a lot of like subcultures at different companies get stuck in organizational inertia where everybody just keeps looking inward at all the problems that you have, but nobody feels like they can solve them.
Right. Well, and we have definitely seen that where, you know, one of our partners with a project that we were doing there, one of the problems that they had internally was quoting. And we would get 150, 200 line items to quote, and we had 24 hours to quote it. And everyone's like, well, that's impossible. How do you run rate on, you know, 200 different line items? And I'm like, well, there's software out there that does that now, and this is what it is, and you can plug everything in, and it'll run your rate. And I'm making it sound way more simple than what it is. But once you have it up and running, it is that simple. It allows you to quote 200 parts in, you know, hours instead of weeks. And the way that the way that we shop now, just like Amazon, we want instant gratification. We want to buy our toothpaste today, and we want it on our porch tomorrow morning, or we want it later that day. And that trickles into our personal life, or in our work life. Is, you know, if I submit a quote to somebody, I want a response the same day. And I definitely want a quote within 24 hours, you know, max. And there's, you know, there are so many in the job shop world. There's so many companies out there that they're like, well, that's stupid. Nobody's moving that fast. Well, the companies that are moving that fast are going to take over the companies that aren't moving that fast, because that's just the way that we're going. And, you know, to your point with, you know, some of the things that we talked about, the culture has to adapt all that. It can't be you where you're like, hey, I think we need to quote differently. If nobody else in the company buys into that, then it's going to derail the culture, because you're going to be pissed that nobody else has bought into it. And then everyone's just going to kind of spiral out of control. And there's 20 of those things that you need to adapt, and, you know, and before you stagnate.
Yeah. And there's more coming constantly. So right. To be able to create a culture where, and this is kind of getting to part of what the solution is, right? So the current systems, or the systems that were built over the last century, as Cotter would put it, they were really built to become very robust and optimized. And that Kaizen was so good for optimizing those systems, because you could generally just look inward, and the customer wasn't changing all of that often, and your products weren't changing that often. And now, I mean, again, the paper industry is a perfect example. When you hear Michael Scott, there's like one episode in there where he's teaching the kids about Dunder Mifflin or something. He's like, and this is how we do it. Like, we order the paper from the paper manufacturer, and then we distribute it to these businesses. And one of the kids is like, isn't that thievery or something like that? Like, we make a profit. It's like, well, yeah, that business hardly needs to exist, basically, right. At least in the way they were operating it. And so right. The only answer to me, or the first step on the journey, if you feel stuck in organizational inertia, has to be looking at the customer and your users. And I do want to differentiate that definition a little bit for anybody who's not fully aware, right? A customer is somebody who pays for a product or service. Right. A user is somebody who uses that product or service. So you might sell to some company that's your customer, but their actual users of the product might be somebody else entirely after they assemble it into a sub-assembly or something like that.
Sure. Well, and that's just good practice as a company. If the more value add you're adding your customer, the longer they're going to stick around. Two, the harder it is for them to move on. But if you're making a widget, if you're making a bearing, but you're not providing, everything else that goes into that entire setup, that entire system, then they could find anyone to just make that bearing. And I think that we are and we have been going down this road for a long time, that, you have to add value. If you're, just pushing Play-Doh out of a die and you're selling sticks of Play-Doh, but you could be doing 13 other things to that Play-Doh before it leaves your shop, then you're just creating that much more value to the customer, and most likely saving them money, even if they're doing those operations in-house, because you're doing it right out of the Play-Doh press. And, I think that people lose sight of that a lot as well. They just want a blanket, or they want to do, a mill of, whatever they're making and send it down the road. But more and more companies that I go into, and I'm sure you as well, they're doing a lot of different value add.
Yeah, you have to be able to differentiate that. And I think Amazon kind of set the model for that with their flywheel concept, that you want to have all these different services and business elements that are all feeding each other.
Right.
And in the end, the customer is at the center, and you're always focused on creating a better world for the customer. And
right.
that playbook that Amazon has created is not the only thing to use going forward, by no means. I mean, they're not perfect, and they do many things that, we probably complain about, but their obsession with the customer, that is truly their secret. I mean, they do a lot of other things well, just like any great company does, but the obsession with the customer, I mean, what you said to me about, if you're just pushing Play-Doh out, you should be very concerned. I hate to be that direct, but you should be very concerned that you're going to get disrupted, like you said, by somebody who actually has their finger to the pulse of what does the customer need? Because when you work with a supplier, you want that supplier to be able to be thinking ahead, be bringing new ideas to you, whether it's for cost down, value add, next generation of your product, or whatever. Nowadays, we compete as an ecosystem. We don't just compete as individual companies. And if we compete as an ecosystem, then we want everybody in the ecosystem to be playing and to be incentivized properly to be able to work together to create a better world.
Yeah. Well, and it just builds that rapport with the customer. And we didn't know how to handle this in the beginning, but, with our warehousing services that, we call it, we would get a little bit of pushback because somebody comes and they're like, hey, we want to see your fee sheet. What do you charge to hold onto a pallet for a month? And I'm like, well, that's one way to do it. We can certainly, we have a cost for that. And I'm like, what else are you doing to that pallet? Like, let's talk about the whole picture. Like, how's it come in? How's it need to go out? What do you do with it? And you can see somebody across the table like, well, we didn't really think about that. We just thought we would send the pallet to you and then you'd send it back to us and, transaction over. And I'm like, well, we certainly can do that. But if we can do, steps 1 through 101 for you before it ever gets to you guys, then let's talk about that. And it is interesting to see, people's face kind of light up to say, okay, well, now these guys want to be a partner. They want to be part of our team. They don't just want, just a transactional relationship here. It's more than that. And it is fun for us because now, we're interacting with the customer where, our team members are going there and learning from them if we're taking things off of their plate. And it just creates, a better culture for us internally. But then when, those folks come to our facility, then it's, they're more friends than they are customers.
Yeah, that relationship is so important. Obviously, whether you're going to be a consultant, a supplier, a customer, building that relationship is critical. I mean, that's what makes sure that everybody gets a win, because we really, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be a part of transactions that are win-loss where you have a zero-sum game. I want to be a part of transactions and relationships where it's a win-win or a win-win-win if it's a three-party transaction where everybody gets something good out of it. And those are going to drive to good things over time, because even if that line of business or product line or whatever goes away, the fact that you get those win-win situations leads you to want to work with those people in the future.
Oh, sure. And there's plenty of examples where people, it's just win for one party, and either the other party goes out of business or the other party feels taken advantage of for as long as they can be taken advantage of, and then finally they're like, okay, can't do this anymore, we're out. And it hurts both companies, right? It hurts the company that was offering the service, but then it also hurts, the big bad behemoth that might be, wanting cost reduction every year, even though the cost is going up. And that's always interesting. That's definitely always an interesting conversation, especially with, the big four, and, it's just all about cost reduction. It's like, where do we take cost out this year? I'm curious. Like, well, take it out here. Like, well, that went up by 10%.
Well, you got to collaborate if you want to be able to achieve costs down that's sustainable long term. So I know we've talked a lot about the customer here. To me, this is something that gets misconstrued in lean in a lot of companies, not in all companies, but lean to some people becomes less inventory, less waste. And it's not that those aren't lean practices, but the core of lean is a pull from the customer. That's it. How do we create a pull from the customer? And then once we have a pull from the customer, how do we optimize the value chain all the way through, like you said, to increase value and reduce non-value add? Then you put in place systems to manage that, people, process, data, technology, and then you can operate truly lean. So let's go there next. I do want to leave people with one maybe practical takeaway, though. I did mention Amazon. So Amazon has a practice called press release FAQ that anybody can look up on Google. There's a million different things you can do that from a design perspective to keep the customer at the center of what you're doing. But press release FAQ is a very simple thing. Anybody can complete it for a new product line that they're launching, a new manufacturing line, new building, even process improvements internally, a new associate recognition system, whatever. You can use this press release FAQ template that Amazon uses. And the idea is we're going to act like we are at launch day for whatever this new thing that we're going to be doing is, and we're going to write up a press release about the launch, and then we're going to write up some frequently asked questions about the launch and answer them almost as if it's going to be published in a tabloid. And what you end up doing as a part of that process is focusing on what is the value proposition? Who is that value proposition for? What are people going to say about the solution that we're implementing here? What kind of questions might people have once we go to implement that solution? So it's just a simple tool anybody can use that I like to go to in certain circumstances to help people be focused on the customer.
Sure. No, and that is really interesting, because Amazon's obviously figured out, especially inventory, right? I mean, that can sink a company. You either have too much or too little. I mean, and there are definitely people out there that have figured out how to have just the right amount unless something changes. So, having all those systems and, like you said, getting, what are people going to say when we're implementing this system? And that's part of culture, getting everyone's buy-in. And I think in order to get everyone's buy-in, they have to understand the system that you're putting in for, the bigger systems, regardless, what it's supporting, if it's, cybersecurity or some sort of an AI, any ERP, any warehouse management system, you have to have that buy-in. And I do think it's important, like you said, listening to what people have to say, because if you're not listening to your people and understanding what their concerns are, and you just brush over them, then I feel you alienate and you probably sabotage the entire program, because the people that are working in the system to implement it are going to find bugs and errors and things that need to be fixed or changed or tweaked to match whatever company you're in.
Yeah. So step one to me is all about the customer and the user. Who is my customer? Who is my user? How well am I following them? And really looking yourself in the mirror and being honest with yourself. How well do I know my user? How well do I know my customer? So then to me, step two is, okay, well, if I do know my user and my customer, how do I execute on that actually? Okay, it's great. I know what my customer wants. I know where I think they're going to be next year and 3 years from now or whatever. How do I sustainably execute on that? Because a lot of people listening might think, well, yeah, if I had 5 of me, I could execute, but I have to delegate to other people. I have to get everybody working in a certain direction. And that kind of comes back to what we were saying about, do you believe that you can actually change your culture, that you can change your systems? And to me, the starting point of that is really, do you provide clarity on where you want to go? If you're a leader, and you can be leading up, you can be leading down, you can be leading horizontally.
Right.
But are you providing clarity of vision? Just because you know where the customer is going, does everyone know where the customer is going?
Sure.
Because it's as soon as that falls off at a middle management layer or the layer below you or whatever, nobody's going that direction anymore. Everybody's just going to suboptimally optimize for whatever metric they have instituted in their local area that's going to get them a good bonus or something.
Right. Well, and if somebody's operating narcissistically for self-preservation or self-reward, that project's dead from the beginning. I don't ever see that ever being successful. It may be successful for a little while, but as soon as your people that you're leading with, whether you're leading up, down, or horizontally, once they start feeling that way, I think everything's ruined.
It can be, and it can also be salvaged, because I want to encourage people who might be listening and thinking, well, honestly, they might have said identity statements like, I can't change. I just can't change anymore. I've been around for too long. I've seen too many cycles. I'm too hardened and jaded and whatever else. Or they might look at their direct reports and be like, oh my gosh, I have this CFO and this guy is never going to change. And
Right.
He does a decent enough job, but until he changes, I don't know how we're going to be able to fix the problems that we keep complaining about, that everybody keeps reporting on the yearly survey or whatever that we just can't get better at. And I just want to encourage people that you can change. I have seen it done, and I have seen people that many thought would never change.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a valid point where if you're always complaining about a problem, then somebody's going to stop listening to you complaining about the problem. I'm going to be the first one. Like I just don't want to listen to somebody complain about a problem. It's like, okay, yeah, we have a problem. I may not know what the solution is. Do you know what the solution is? Like, if you come to me with a problem, like come with a solution or an idea. It doesn't even have to be perfect. And I think that even, with our customers, if we just go to the customer with a problem, but we don't offer up any solutions, then we're just whining. Like, stop whining, figure out a solution, and that will help somebody change. If you really want your CFO that is never going to change, well, bring some solutions. And even if the 5 solutions get shot down, at some point you're going to bring a solution that he's going to go, you know what, let's give that a go. Maybe that'll help. And he or she could just be so burnt out if they've been a CFO for that long, where they just glass over and they don't, they're like, God, we've tried everything, but nothing has worked. And fresh new mind could bring a new idea to fix that, whatever that problem is.
Yeah. And I would say that what comes to me with the clarity, so you have to provide clarity of vision. You have to provide clarity of narrative. So especially if you're leading upward and you're trying to convince someone in the C-suite of a company or something to do something, there has to be a clear narrative. Otherwise, don't even waste your time trying to sell it to somebody. Yeah. But if you do have a clear narrative about where you want to go and why it's valuable to go there, and you think it's aligned with what should be happening, then how do you actually start doing it? Because selling it is one thing, but we've all had days when we thought, oh, I'll go do this great thing. I'll eat healthier. I'll start this tomorrow. But then actually practicing it is a complete other thing. And I think there's some good examples in Atomic Habits and other books and self-development resources. But really, the answer is ever so simple. You have to start practicing. Yep. And the practice has to be small at first, because you don't transform overnight, but you got to start practicing. If you want, like in your example that you just gave, Dustin, if we have somebody who's always bringing problems, but never bringing solutions, then start a practice of bringing solutions and be the first person to show up every single time and say, hey, we're going to have this hour where we move from problem to solution. And we're going to start with this backlog of ideas or problems that we're going to work through. And here, we'll pull different diverse perspectives into the room, and we're just going to do this.
Yep.
And we're just going to see how it works. And then slowly you layer on top of that. And again, if you have the clarity and you're giving people new principles, new operating principles, like we're going to work across the silos now, everybody. I'm going to keep repeating that. There's no business in IT. Stop making a wall between business and IT. There's no business in IT. Right. Everybody comes in the room to solve the problem. And you keep repeating it, and then you instill it and design it into your weekly, your daily, your monthly practices. That's how over time stuff just starts to change. And I don't know what to tell you. It's just moving granules of sand from one sand pile to another.
Yeah, and that's such a good vision because I think so many people are like, okay, well, we have this problem. I think there could be 5 different solutions, and then they get paralysis by analysis, and they just keep reanalyzing everything, and they don't just say, okay, we're picking this one. I don't care if it's paper, rock, scissors. We're going to pick this solution, and we're just going to start, even if it is, one piece of sand at a time. And people just get so, they're anxious. Well, what if it's not right? Well, if it's not right, you change. If you start going down this path and you're like, oh man, we should have done this instead of that. Well, do that. It's not too late to shift a little bit. And people they're afraid to do anything. And not all people, obviously, but if you're in an organization and people are afraid to change, it's just because they're afraid of failing, and the fear of, what if this doesn't work? What if I have this idea and we're going down this path and it's wrong, and then I'm the one that gave the solution to the CFO? It's like, well, that could happen, and if you have a good enough leader, he's going to shift with you to help make it successful.
Yeah, there's a great Simon Sinek quote about that, where he says, try, fail, try again, change the world. And that's a paraphrase of it, but people are probably familiar with it. Yeah. And you have to be willing to put yourself out there. If you want to change, you will fail. You will absolutely fail if you want to change. And that's okay. Failure is a piece of the process, and we should reward ourselves for the effort that we took to be able to do something different, even when it fell flat. Because in that first ideation meeting or whatever you hold, where you're like, we're not going to bring problems, we're going to bring solutions. Yep. There's probably going to be like 2 people who show up, and maybe some onlookers who are very skeptical, who show up because you tell them to show up or whatever. Yep. And at the end of the first meeting, there's going to be points where it was painful and where nobody talked and people didn't participate on the whiteboard or using the sticky notes or whatever virtual whiteboarding tool you're using. Right. You didn't want to, but you have to keep going even despite that, because you reward yourself. You can reprogram. This is a whole other thing, but you can reprogram your brain a little bit to stop giving you a dopamine reward for doing something you feel got a good result, but instead to give yourself a dopamine reward for doing the thing you're supposed to be doing. Some people say, trust the process.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, the fear of failure is ingrained in us from a very young age because of how we're taught in this country. And you don't get rewarded for failures, you get rewarded for only succeeding. So if you don't get an A on your test, and you get an F, you're shunned because you failed that. Well, let's go back a little bit and say, okay, well, it's okay, you failed that test. Like, how do we pass that? How do we learn from the failure of that test? And it's one thing that, there's a lot of things about our education system. We could go down a whole nother, rabbit hole here, but we're just programmed that's not okay to fail. And so many entrepreneurs are, there's so many people around them that when an entrepreneur does fail, because every entrepreneur fails at some point, and people are, poking fun at them, saying, I told you so. That's why old entrepreneurs are callous and, weather burnt, and they look like cowboys, because you're like, okay, well, just, you're negative, stay away from me. And same thing in companies, where if you have a couple naysayers, listen to them, take their input, but decide what you're going to really ingrain. Just because they disagree with what you're trying to do, be a leader, step up, have conviction in it, give a clear path, as you put it, paint a clear picture of, here's where we're at, this is where we're going, and this is why. And help bring those naysayers along. And if those naysayers don't want to fall in line, then, maybe you got to find somebody else to sit in that seat on the bus.
Yeah. And over time that will just sort itself out. Basically, if you if you create a culture that's different than the culture was 5 years ago, certain people will get spit out by that new culture. Yeah. And as long as the culture is moving in the right direction, like, it's probably a good thing.
Yeah. Well, and you see that a lot with acquisitions, right? If one company buys another company, the people at the company that they're buying, a lot of those people don't last very long if they don't buy into that new culture. And the new company bought your company because something was off, or maybe the owner just wanted to sell or retire. But you also have to, in order to be a good leader, you have to be a good follower. And if you find yourself on a team that you may not 100% agree with what's going on, buy in, give your input, but buy in and take your marching orders and help that leader get to the end line, even if you disagree with them, but do it and do it well.
Yep, you got to stick it through. You got to follow the process, and that's what it's going to take once you figure out what the vision is. Where you want to go for the customer, for the user, for the world, for your team members, for yourself, whatever. So that's kind of step 2 for me here. And again, this is a model we're coming up with on the fly mostly. Yeah. So this isn't a model that I've written a book about or anything, but it's what I've seen, and it's kind of the correlation of my experiences. So how do you take this and scale it, though? Because what we're talking about here is great for a team or for a smaller organization or something like that, where you have a lot more authority or influence over what's going on. So how do you scale this? And that's where I want to introduce kind of an evolution of lean that may be new to a lot of people, but there is a movement for lean agile. Okay. So basically taking the principles of lean and applying and kind of mashing it up with, for lack of a better term, the software development flow called agile that has been built over the last 30 or more years now. And what lean agile does is it basically takes the mindsets and the principles of lean and it melds them with the practices of agile, where agile is all about quick iteration. Agile is all about the team working very closely together to be able to solve problems autonomously, decentralizing decision-making to the level that the information is at. So when you apply a combination of lean and agile, what you end up with is, taking us back to where we were at the beginning, a pull mechanism from the customer where you define, what value do we provide to the customer? Our company might provide a couple different value propositions. I see a lot of software firms out there nowadays who, they used to be a consulting firm. So that's one of their main value propositions, is they might consult on, technical architecture, data strategy, business strategy, whatever. But now these companies, they're starting to also have a value stream around selling these web-based software tools that they build. So they build them internally in order to run their consulting operations, but now they sell these web-based tools because they've already proven them out internally. They solve a problem, the users adopt them, they're good. So how do we sell them to somebody else? So I think what you want to look at is, what are my value streams of my business? And if you're an individual contributor or whatever, what value stream are you a part of? Is somebody clearly telling you what value stream you are a part of? What drives value end to end, from supplier to consumer, basically? Mm-hmm. And then from there, figuring out, how do we optimize at the value stream level? So it seems inherent to lean that we would want to do that, but we must do it at the value stream level, because what becomes so easy to do is to optimize for a piece of the value stream, a silo, if you will. Mm-hmm. We'll make this more efficient, like you said. And it even happens our company's more efficient, but everybody outside now has to ship everything in twice as many trucks because we became more efficient. So now we have the environmental issues that we're creating. Now we have cost up, and we're just not optimizing for the whole value stream. So I see this in so many different places. Everybody I talk to has a story about siloed optimization. So I think if you know who the customer is and you're empowering your people to be able to start practicing, customer-centric mindset, lean mindset, now it's time to actually substantiate a system underneath of that that says this is our value streams that our company is going after. We will fund these value streams. We will put, you almost can budget based on value stream. How much money do we want to put into this, this value stream? It might be aligned to a product line or something like that, or some services you provide. But what you end up building is a system by which you can constantly prioritize the customer, because you're focused on pulling end-to-end value to the customer. So I'll give you an example, because this might be very esoteric, right? So let's say we'll just use software development because everybody's familiar with the apps on their phone. So let's say you have an app, but again, this could be like a physical product that you make as well. So that app probably has a couple different pieces that make it up. It might have like a login function. It has a database that tracks the user's information. It might have like a cart if it's a shopping app. Let's just say we're shopping for books on this app. I don't know, early stage Amazon.
Right.
It's going to have a cart. It's going to have search functionality. It might have integration to different data sources to pull in, reviews or data about the books. Cool. So that is your value stream, is you're delivering books or you're delivering ebooks or whatever to a customer. So looking at the end-to-end value stream, how do we get the books? How do we present the books to the customer? How do we procure the books? Whatever. How does the customer provide feedback on the process? If we look at the whole thing as an end-to-end value stream, we want to optimize off of, and this is, I don't know how this is going to come out, but one backlog. There should be one backlog of things to work on for that value stream. And that's tough for most people to get their head around, because they're used to, well, we have 6 projects and they're all competing for they all need this one engineer to work on them so that they can move the ball forward. How it all comes together in a business environment is you got to have one freaking priority system,
right,
for a value stream. You cannot have, if you have competing priorities, I always tell people, if you tell me 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, when I ask you what your priorities are, you have no priority system.
Yeah. And especially a company as large as what you work for, and there's plenty of $100 million companies out there that they're very siloed out. And if there's multiple business sectors under the same company and they're not treating each other like a customer, and they're, the squeaky wheel always gets the grease, type of management, then it's going to turn into a disaster at some point. And you have to have a system and one priority. And if there's one engineer bouncing back and forth between 2 or 3 divisions, everyone's got to be on the same page. And it is interesting because everyone's, especially if they're, they have separate P&Ls and, all these things, they're out for their own. And we've seen a couple companies here in the last couple of years that they've changed that entire mindset. If they had, 4 different divisions, they now operate under one P&L, and it takes away that, well, we're doing this because I have to hit my bonus. It may not be the best thing for the customer, but it's the best thing for Jim. Well, Jim's got, he's got to get back on the bus.
Yeah. And this is the hardest part, because the first 2 are like atomic habits type things that you can do where it's like, okay, we can implement rituals where we check in on the customer and the users, and we bring everybody closer to what the customer and the user thinks. We can implement practices, slowly stacking them on top of each other, kind of moving the granules of sand from the old way to the new way. But eventually, this is the kicker. If you want that to not just be a one-time transformation where we create this new image of the customer and we put it all over the walls and we implement all these new like weekly and monthly rituals and stuff, and we got a new quality management process, we got all this stuff, it's great. But if you don't want to have to do that every 5 to 10 years and stop and be like, we lost the customer again, that picture on the wall that's 5 years old, that ain't it.
Right. You
have to create an operating system. And this may, even for small companies, I would argue an operating system is very relevant. You already have an operating system, in fact. Every company has an operating system. It's kind of the bundle of processes and practices that you use to manage everything from your spend to your product to your employees, all of it. There's a system that everything else gets built on top of. And if
Right.
you don't think about that base system, that operating system your company runs on, and you don't even know that it like consciously exists, it will not be aligned. What is the purpose of an operating system on your computer or on your phone?
Right.
The purpose is to create alignment between all of these diverse apps and processes and sensors and everything that's going to get connected together. Something has to be consistent on there and say, hey, this is how this sensor data is going to be read, and this is how it's going to get displayed to the user. You need to use standard protocols to do that. So if your organization does not have those things standardized, and it's not the end of the world if you don't, most companies don't. But if you end up with a bundle of practices that are generally causing discomfort for people and pain as they go, like, oh, the budgeting cycle isn't right again. We should have been able to follow the customer, but we weren't because of X, Y, and Z. This is an opportunity to just take a look at your operating system, lay out all the different practices, strategy, and tactics and stuff that you do, and figure out how do they align. And if you're looking for kind of an example of an open source operating system that can work on anything from a small business to a huge enterprise, I am not at all sponsored by this company. I just happen to know about it. It's an open source framework, but it's called the Scaled Agile Framework, and it's a lean agile framework that will help you to be able to do these things. So again, there's many different kind of scaled agile frameworks out there, but I would just say looking at a scaled agile framework, they generally have for, hey, if your company is only building one product line, has one value stream, basically, all the way up to if your company has 100 value streams, then you need to figure out how to follow the customer in perpetuity so that you're not constantly having to do these transformation initiatives for your business.
Right. That's interesting. And to have one operator, that's definitely something that I have not heard before, and it completely makes sense. And I think that for me, I've always thought okay, well, we have HubSpot for sales, and we have this program for our ERP, and we have this program for warehouse management, and we have this for that. And you end up with 4 or 5 different systems, and they're not on the same operating system, as you put it, and they're not all talking to each other and working together. That's where people end up managing things in spreadsheets, I think, and where your inventory gets out of whack because they're not using the system. And they're like, well, Jim, our inventory in the system, it says that we have 1,000 of these. He's like, oh no, that's wrong. Look at my spreadsheet. It's like, why isn't it right in the system? And why are, whoever's in charge of, taking things off the shelf or putting things on the shelf, why aren't they doing that in the system instead of you doing it on a spreadsheet? And now only you know what's going on, and it shouldn't be like that. Not one person should know what's going on with inventory, for example.
Well, you really want to lay it all out clear for people. So that's a perfect example in terms of like if you just have like a software system. If all we were thinking was just a software platform to run your whole business on, you're right. Look at all the problems you have with all these different software platforms that don't properly talk to each other. And that probably causes you so much non-value add in your business that these things don't talk. Now think about your business processes and how they're loosely connected together. And one person owns this and another person owns that. And then like how much falls through the cracks and how many meetings that are non-value added are required to try to rectify. Yeah, why aren't we achieving our strategic objectives again? Oh yeah, because somebody launched like 6 other things off of that. and we're not tracking them all the way back up to see how we're achieving that strategic objective. Yeah. We have so many people managing them and they're not talking to each other. That's what happens when you don't have a cohesive operating system for your company.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is the customer, getting, whatever widget from dock to door. And if none of these systems are in place or they're broken, then the person that's really hurting is the customer. I mean, yeah, the company, they could lose the customer, but I think that's secondary, right? Yeah, we want to keep the customer, but the main objective should be serving that customer to the best of your ability, whatever that means. And if you can do it on a spreadsheet, then by all means do it on a spreadsheet. But, the scale of your business and things like that, if, you have a small 2-person weld shop, then yeah, you could probably manage everything on a spreadsheet. But to serve more than two customers, you do have to change. And, like we talked earlier with with the ocean constantly changing, it's going to change everything. Just what you're doing for cybersecurity right now is not going to be what you're doing for cybersecurity in 5 years. And that is the same for everything in your business. You have to evolve.
Yep. And it'll keep on changing. And that's why the operating system is so key, because we don't know what waves are coming at the end of 2024, much less in 2030.
Right.
So building out a system that's not just about end-to-end manufacturing or whatever, but that's actually something you can run your business on, that's going to enable you to be able to respond faster and more directionally to the changes that are coming versus, well, we started this and now we got to focus on this. And that's, in the end, it's going to drive better experience for your customer. And like you said, that's really what matters, because what your customer doesn't want is a business that's slow to respond, doesn't have access to data, doesn't know what the priority of that customer's order is right now and can't figure that out, what the ETA is or something, right? The customer just wants to feel like you want to feel.
Yeah.
So building a system that your company runs on, that's how you're going to be able to have Dustin be able to take some time off and be like, it's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. I'm not relying on people. I'm relying on a system.
Yep. Well, and the people are a huge part of it. I don't want to minimize that, because junk in, junk out. You could have the best Oracle system in the world, and if the people aren't putting the right number in the right spot, then you have a really expensive thing that doesn't work. And going back to any of these systems, it is about culture. I think that's probably, in my opinion, that's probably the most important part about all of this is the culture that you have at your facility. And if people aren't bought in, then the systems are going to suck. And I'm sure that with the teams that you've been on, you've probably stepped into the middle of people not being happy and not wanting to, they don't believe in the project and things like that. So
yeah, the culture is the key. You're right there at the end. If once you figured out where you want to go, if you don't want to fight things at an instance level.
Right.
And if you have a bad culture or a culture that's not aligned with the company's vision, you're going to always fight things at an instance level. You're going to always be having to go into HR. You're going to always be having to go down and renegotiate, how contracts are working, how processes are working and stuff like that. Versus if you can create a culture where everyone values the customer, everyone is valued in this system, now you have something to build on, because now you can actually move fast and respond quickly to the changing environment around you.
Yeah. Well, and once you get all this figured out, it's going to help bring more business, because now you're just storytelling, and you've got your systems in place, and you can easily say, okay, well, this is, your situation seems a lot like this person, and this is what we were able to help them do. Let's go back and see, how can we help you? Like, where does this fit? Are we a good fit for you? But what we're doing and the problems that you're having, if I'm hearing you correctly, would this be a good solution for that problem? And then you can tweak it and plug that new customer into your system, and now it's sustainable, and you're able to do more, and instead of just getting bogged down with a couple of, we have 3 good customers, but we can't handle anymore. Let's figure that one out.
Yeah, and I will say I would be remiss to miss this opportunity to pitch a book, because people love books, right? Most people who listen to podcasts probably also like to read, or at least listen to audiobooks. Sure. There's a great book, if people haven't read it, Team of Teams, New Rules of Engagement for a Complex World by General Stanley McChrystal. And it is such a well-done piece explaining why the change is happening faster than it's ever happened, how different U.S. military operations responded to that, and responded to the fact that the world was changing faster than they understood that it was, basically, and how that resulted in unsatisfactory results for a time, and what they had to learn on how to build an organization that was resilient to that change and even anti-fragile, where they were able to respond better when there was change because they were able to be like a first mover when the change happened, where the change actually was to their advantage at that point. And that's the type of organization that I think we want to be. So I'm not going to be able to say it nearly as well as General McChrystal can say it, but Team of Teams is a great book. It's not that long of a read, and it's a good audiobook as well.
Perfect. No, we'll get that up on our blog as well, and we'll have links to your podcast, and I'm sure we'll dig through and pull out other books that we talked about and things like that. And if there's anything that we missed or people have questions about, obviously feel free to reach out to us. We're kind of nerds about just talking about this kind of stuff and that. So this could even fall, do another episode at some point that's more direct at one little piece of the sliver that we talked about. We kind of went all over the place, and that's how my mind works. So I apologize for the ADHD bouncing all around, but I think Drew, you brought me back in pretty well multiple times. So, good job on that. I really appreciate you coming on. Rich, we met through Rich, right?
Yeah. Yep. Rich Brown, the ultimate connector.
Yeah. Rich and I did a podcast, I think in 2021 together. So thank you, Rich, for connecting you and I.
Yeah. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this episode of MFG Monkey. If you have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, please email them to us at info@mfgmonkey.com.